Welcome back, explorers. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss new discoveries or new episodes. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, don't forget to rate and comment. And if you're new here, welcome. I hope you love ancient history, mythology, and archaeology as much as I do, because my name is Dr. Tenendra Kellenberger. I'm an archaeologist and art historian, and I bring the ancient world to you. Because no, this is not ancient aliens. This is the real thing. And of course, these are the Dirt Diaries. And of course, a special shout out and hello to those lounging in the villa, taking notes in the library, and snooping in the restricted section over on Patreon. So, last time on Dirt Diaries, well, we explored the elixir to life and, asked ourselves the age-old question of, would you want to live forever if you could? And of course, right after filming that, I fell down a rabbit hole about the later Fountain of Youth and Ponce de Leon, which is how my brain works for how we got to today's episode, shockingly. So, we get the Fountain of Youth. Then we get Ponce de Leon. So then turn left because I was looking for elixir of life aesthetic for creating the thumbnail for the podcast cover and everything, which of course brought me to classical Greek and Roman sculpture, because of course it does. And then of course made me think of the goddess of love, Aphrodite, because of course it does, because in Turkey they just actually released the finding of a statue head of her from a fountain. And then hop, skip, and a jump later, I was like, the Roman goddess Venus. And then that's how I landed on today's topic of prehistoric Venus figurines, which ding ding is today's topic. So if you've ever wanted a little insight into how my brain works, there you go. Welcome to the Terror Dome. And as mythology goes, well, Greco-Roman mythology, if I'm being specific, Aphrodite and Venus are goddesses of love, lust, sexuality, pleasure, and so much more. But did you know that there are prehistoric Venus figurines? Yes, of course there are. Why else would you be here? And I absolutely love them. They are utterly gorgeous. So I wanted to talk not only about them, but showcase how women or even prehistoric goddesses were depicted over thousands of years. And a little insight into my brain is also, anytime that I'm having kind of like a bad body image day, I often think about how Renaissance artists would have loved your body type. I also think about how ancient artists would have also loved your body type. I love looking at Greco-Roman renditions of Venus and Aphrodite, and I'm blanking on the Aphrodite sculpture. It's in the Museum of Naples, but it's Aphrodite bending over, and I think Eros is with her. But anyway, Aphrodite's bending over, and you actually see stomach rolls. You're actually seeing a real body in front of you. And anytime I'm having a bad body image day, I often think about that. And then from, Greco-Roman sculptures, I often also think about how the female form has been depicted since Paleolithic times, from over tens of thousands of years ago, how the female body has been depicted in artwork, how it has been crafted and recrafted. And that's just why I also love them as well. And that's why I really wanted to talk about it today. I'll be honest with you guys, we're friends, we're amongst two mates here. I haven't been feeling the best. And I'm actually having surgery tomorrow. Fun fact, 2025 started off great, and unfortunately my gallbladder just stopped working. So he's coming out. And yeah, I just have been feeling kind of meh, and I love being able to do my makeup and get ready with you guys and talk about, ancient art, archaeology, mythology, and all of that kind of cool jazz. But I wanted to do the topic of prehistoric Venus figurines today because I often reflect on them when I'm kind of feeling meh, not my greatest, maybe a bad body image day, and all of that kind of stuff. So that's also why I wanted to cover these topics today. So from me to you, I hope you love these little ladies as much as I do. They are some of my favorite things in the world. And I absolutely love how ancient artisans were just capturing basically little instances of humanity for thousands of years. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. So you may be wondering, what exactly are Venus figurines? Because if you're watching on YouTube or even watching on Spotify, the images I show aren't going to immediately have you guys think, oh, that's Venus. These images don't exactly scream goddess Venus. at least as we know her from Greco-Roman sculpture. So these Venus figures and, the term Venus are actually used to describe more than 200 small individual statuettes of what scholars call voluptuous female figures that have been found at Upper Paleolithic sites all across Europe and Asia. And most of these figures have been found at Paleolithic sites that are either open air or in caves. But while they are extremely rare, there are a few instances where Venus figures are actually found in burial context. So they're found in graves. So for the curious little kitty cats who are like, Upper Paleolithic, I don't recall learning about that back in school. Well, those dates are actually before both the Neolithic and the Mesolithic. So 4 dates for all my chronology people out there. The dates are really from 50,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago. So 50,000 BP to 12,000 BP. And BP is just shorthand for before present. Now, of course, this 50 to 12,000 BP range will kind of fluctuate depending where you are in the world, as is normal with other chronology that we've seen before. The Bronze Age of the Eastern Mediterranean is going to be a different time period than, say, the Bronze Age of Northern Europe. And then, of course, after the Upper Paleolithic, you get the Mesolithic, and then you get the Neolithic, and then you get the Chalcolithic, which is the Copper Age, and then you get the Early Bronze Age, which, of course, bronze. And when paleoanthropologists are actually referring to these figures as Venuses, it's really interesting because these female figures were carved thousands of years before the mythology of the goddess of love really came into existence. But the name Venus, of course, derives from the theoretical associations that these female figures have with sexuality and fertility, 2 traits that are really heavily associated with the goddess Venus, who, of course, is the Roman love goddess. It's the counterpart to the Greek Aphrodite. Now, these figurines actually date anywhere between 40,000 BCE and 10,000 BCE. Of course, BCE, before Common Era. And almost all of these statues, reliefs, and more, they're extremely tiny. A lot of them can actually fit perfectly in the palm of your hand. In fact, many of these sizes range anywhere from 2.5 centimeters to just over 10 centimeters, which, if you're wondering what that is in inches, it's about just underneath of an inch, all the way, if you guys will believe, all the way up to 4 inches. Yes, these are little ladies. And these little ladies are mainly made out of mammoth ivory, mammoth tusks. But in some cases, we actually see teeth being used, antlers being used, as well as bone and also stone. And then, of course, in a few instances, we get the rarities of these Venus figures actually being created out of ceramic, which are some of the earliest evidence of ceramics in the world. And just like the Roman goddess of love and her depictions, these female figures are usually depicted in the nude. And they usually have prominent breasts, wide hips, stomachs, and more that may be exaggerated. And while some features are exaggerated or more predominant than others, we actually also see a lack of individualized details. So, for example, we're not seeing individualized details of eyes, noses, mouths, anything like that that we could point out as being, oh, this might be a personal portrait, or this might have represented a woman 10,000 plus years ago. No, we actually rarely get any individualized characteristics. Now, while the artist who crafted these female figures were separated by a period of over 30,000 years, and in many cases separated by hundreds of miles, it's crazy to me to see that so many of them have so many similar characteristics, traits, and more. It's truly just a beautiful phenomena of how these ancient prehistoric peoples are deciding to construct female beauty of the time. And it's just so beautiful. Like, they truly do deserve to be called Venus figures. So, who was the first lucky lady to be discovered? Who was the first Venus? Well, so glad you asked. And that is none other than the Venus Impudicae. And I'm sorry I'm butchering that name. But that name really just translates to the immodest Venus, which we'll come back to. And she was actually recovered in 1864 in southwest France. And she is the first ever Venus figure to be found, and is also the first Venus figure to be discovered in France. So the name, Immodest Venus. Yes, let's talk about that. So the name is actually said to be a reversal of the Venus Pudica. And the Venus Pudica is also known as the modest Venus, shockingly, I know. And this form is actually really pretty famous in Greco-Roman sculpture. So when it's a statue that is referred to as the Venus Pudica, what that means is it is basically the Venus who is trying to cover herself, the modest Venus. So more often than not, it's the sculptures where the Venus will have one hand trying to cover her breasts and the other will actually be trying to cover her pubic area. And it's almost as if you, as the viewer, have stumbled onto the goddess bathing, and of course as she's bathing she's nude and she's trying to cover herself. It's almost kind of like you've stumbled on her. And while that's kind of, cutesy and all, if you know anything about Greco-Roman mythology and goddesses bathing and viewers or characters or individuals stumbling upon a bathing goddess, well, it doesn't normally end well. There's quite a few stories about that. And so as we, as the viewer, have stumbled upon this goddess while bathing, she's trying to show modesty. She's trying to protect herself. So by calling this Venus figure the immodest Venus, what they're trying to say is that this figure has no attempt to try and cover any of her modesty. And it's kind of hard to do so because she doesn't have arms. It's kind of hard to protect your modesty if you don't have arms. It's really like a Venus de Milo moment. So it's kind of crazy that they're calling her the immodest Venus when she has no arms to protect her modesty. But 1864 was a different time. And this immodest Venus, well, she stands at just about 8 centimeters high, which is just over 3 inches tall. And what's really interesting, not only because she's the first Venus to be discovered and we get the namesake for the other nude female forms, from this Venus, but what's interesting is this Venus, she, one, isn't protecting her modesty, but two, she also doesn't have many similar characteristics to the other Venuses. So what do I mean by that is where other Venus figures have, larger stomachs, they could be, depicted pregnant or anything like that. This Venus actually has a flat stomach. Scholars also believe that she is a younger woman. It's going to be a different age group than the other Venuses that we're seeing today. And this Venus, she was actually crafted about 16,000 years ago. And of course, I earlier had said that, many of these Venuses don't have individualized characteristics. And that's true. The immodest Venus, this first Venus, she's actually really the only one to have vastly different features than the rest of the Venus figures. And because of this, scholars actually think that this Venus figure may actually be more of a portrait of a specific individual rather than a symbolic sculpture. And of course, for those over on Patreon, we actually dove into what may be the world's oldest portrait, which was super cool, especially because of the burial evidence we also talked about. So now that we've met the first Venus who set the stage for the rest of the women that we are going to talk about, of course, only talking about a few today, we're going to have to cover so many more out of the 200. I think we're only talking about like 4 or 5 today. So because we've met the woman, the myth, the legend, we actually now got to start with, who was the oldest, who is currently the record holder of the oldest Venus figurine? Because I love her. I mean, I love all of them in this episode that we're talking about, but I love this next one. So the current record holder of the world's oldest Venus figure that is not contested. Yes, there are, I think, two that predate her, 2 or 3 that predate her, but they are currently contested. So the current oldest Venus figurine is the Venus of Hohle Fels. Now, who is this Venus? Well, this Venus is actually small enough to fit in your fist. So she's not very big at all. And she was found in a cave of the same name in modern Germany. And she's actually one of the more recent discoveries. She was actually found in 2008. And she is actually believed to be between 35,000 and 40,000 years old. Like, that is just so crazy to me that, like, right now, coming from the immodest Venus to the Venus of Hohle Fels, like, we're getting more than double the time. So the oldest Venus is almost 40,000 years old, and the immodest Venus, who we got the name from, is 16,000 years old. Like, that just blows my mind. Like, time like that just blows my mind. It's like how Cleopatra is actually closer in time presently to us in 2025 than she was to the building of the pyramids. Yeah, like, think about that and your brain will just explode. It's also kind of on par with when the pyramids were being built in ancient Egypt, woolly mammoths were still around. Like, that's just time for you. Like, it's crazy. Time is wild. But speaking of woolly mammoths, she is carved from mammoth ivory. She does not have a head, but in place of a head is actually a loop, meaning this little lady could have been worn as a pendant. Now, I will say she is not the only Venus to have a loop or a perforation on her, suggesting that the Venus figure could be worn, but it is really interesting to see that the world's oldest Venus figurine does have a loop on the top, suggesting that individuals could have worn her as a pendant on a necklace or as part of jewelry. Or if as jewelry, she could have been worn as part of a, say, protective amulet or even a totem, which is really interesting if we're thinking about this little Venus figure as part of a pendant, part of jewelry, part of anything that is so personal and individualized. It really makes me think about, what am I wearing as jewelry? And would I have worn, perhaps, like, how tall is she? She is 3 inches. So, like, yeah, I totally would have worn her. So while she doesn't have a head or face, she is depicted with large breasts, her hands are holding her stomach, and she has a carved pubic triangle, which I don't know if you guys have heard about, pubic triangles in art, but in art, especially prehistoric art, it's usually a stylized representation of the pubic region. And it's more often than not interpreted as a symbol of reproduction, fertility, sexuality, and other aspects of womanhood. And pubic triangles are actually commonly seen on Venus figurines and throughout prehistoric art all around the world. And here on this Venus, we actually see the emphasis placed on the elements of reproduction and, of course, fertility. So, of course, because of this, when she was found back in 2008, well, the news headlines, man, these people were clutching their pearls because news headlines were calling her prehistoric porn. And when I saw this when I was doing research, because back in 2008, I was, well, depending on when she was discovered, I was either in 8th or 9th grade. So I didn't see this live. But when I was doing the research and I came across these headlines calling the world's oldest Venus figurine prehistoric porn, I was literally almost grasping my own pearls and clutching them because how could you see this beautiful female figure, some of the earliest representations of humanity, and instantly think of prehistoric porn? I don't know. Because to me, all I can see is a representation of what these prehistoric peoples held so near and dear to them, as well as truly the power of women. Like, Truly, I am perplexed. But alas, her finding also reignited the debate concerning what these early individuals wanted to convey in this type of art and what they wanted to convey through their representations of the female form. In fact, anthropologists at Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, and again, I am sorry for my mispronunciations, they recently published a study arguing that the corpus of these female figurines, well, they may actually symbolize a hope for a well-nourished community. And not only that, but for the survival and reproductive success of said communities. Which, yeah, I totally see that. If you were well-nourished back in the Upper Paleolithic era, you would have been able to bring in new life. You not only would have been able to support pregnancy and birth and everything, but your community, if they also were well nourished and had enough resources, they could have also sustained more community members. And so the Venus of Hohle is actually the oldest representation of a human in the world. And while she is the oldest representation of a human, she may also represent a fertility goddess, which I just absolutely love. And next up, chronologically, okay, like I know I just said that the last Venus, the Venus of Hohle, was one of my favorites and I love her, and I do, and this is nothing against her, but the next one, chronologically speaking, I think is my favorite, probably because I grew up studying her. She was in every single art history class that I've ever taken. She is famous for being in every art history 101 class, as she is a great representation of prehistoric artwork, and she's one of the most well-known pieces. So please welcome the Venus of Willendorf. She's my favorite, and I love her. Alrighty, so the Venus of Willendorf sits at about 11 centimeters tall, which is 4 inches, and she's absolutely adorable. Like, I need to find a replica of her for, like, my area because she's just perfect. And she was crafted by human hands 30,000 years ago. So she was found during August of 1908 during excavations of a Paleolithic site near the village of Willendorf in Austria. Nailed it. So, hence the name, Venus of Willendorf. So honestly, if there's one thing us archaeologists can do well, it's name things. Honestly, it's truly a gift we have. And unlike the other Venuses that we just talked about, she is not made out of mammoth ivory. She's actually made out of oolitic limestone. And while oolitic limestone is not common for this area, it's actually not local to Willendorf at all, which we're going to come back to. And on her, we actually do have some remains of red ochre pigment. Her small stature and the material indicate that she was made elsewhere. And then, following her creation, she was then carried to the region, which on its own is such an incredible feat. And I know we've talked about ancient trade before, but this once again is just reaffirming how interconnected these people were. So let's talk about her. Her arms are visible, but they are not really represented. Like, we have her shoulders, but everything else from her biceps really down, they're not well represented. This time though, her head is actually represented. There is no loop this time, but the only detail that we have on her head is a pattern that may actually possibly represent a braid, it may represent a headdress, or it may represent a cap. But those are kind of the top theories on what this pattern or motif represents. And of course, we see large breasts, we see a predominant stomach, we see a pubic triangle, we see her legs, we see wide hips, and she's actually missing her feet. Like, from like the mid shin down, we don't have anything else. Alrighty, so I said that, that rock is not local to the area. So where did she come from? Where did she go? Where did she come from, Cotton Eye Joe? Anywho, so where did she come from? So according to a study that was published back in 2022, researchers found that the closest and most likely source of oolite that could have been used during this time period was actually located on the other side of the Alps in Italy. Actually, northern Italy to be exact, near Lake Garda, which if you're wondering how far away that is from the little village of Willendorf, it is over 300 miles away. It's over 600 kilometers away. I did know that, but I had to put that in miles as well. That's no walk around the park, you guys. Like that's still something. That is still a huge area to cover. All right, so in this report, it also showed that there may have been a second source that was available during this time. The issue is it's a lot further away. So the secondary site that the report also focused on and mentioned as a possible origin of this stone actually is in eastern Ukraine and is over 1,000 miles away from Willendorf. And while the site in northern Italy has a statistically higher chance at being the origin where the stone came from, the site in the Ukraine is actually located near some Paleolithic sites that are in southern Russia that have also yielded similar female figurines, which again raises the question of trade, mobility, and more. So yes, while the stone may have come from, northern Italy, it may also have come from eastern Ukraine. As parts of the body associated with fertility, childbirth, and more have been emphasized on this figure, researchers believe that the Venus of Willendorf and other similar Venus figures may have been used or viewed as fertility goddesses, which prehistoric religion is while so interesting, is so hard to find in the archaeological record. Other scholars for the Venus of Willendorf have actually speculated that she was actually created as a self-portrait, with, of course, the artists being women. And this theory stems from the correlation of the proportions of the statues to how the proportions of the women's bodies would have seemed if they were looking down at themselves. Which, if you look at the different angles of the photography of the Venus of Willendorf, it does actually look like what you could imagine a person would see when they look down. That is actually what you would see on your own body. So that is a really interesting theory. And from this theory, I think it's a really interesting way that we can kind of have a personal feeling to the past, to the prehistoric past, thousands of years ago, that even today, women, we can look down and see our own bodies. And perhaps women were doing that, over 30,000 years ago. It's a really, really cool theory. And other thoughts that I have on the Venus of Willendorf of like why she is one of my favorites. I absolutely adore her because of the fact that her face is kind of unknown. It's kind of masked by that braid motif. That could be a cap, it could be a braid, it could be a headdress, it could be really anything. But what I absolutely love about that is it's kind of mysterious. Like anybody who looks at her can kind of almost put yourself in that shoe. It's not meant to represent anybody specifically, but perhaps maybe almost this overarching mother goddess, fertility goddess aspect that perhaps these ancient women really looked up to. Perhaps she brought them solace in times of need and everything. And yeah, I don't know. Considering that, like on the Sticks and Bones podcast, the other podcast that I co-host, when we looked at, divine feminine archetypes and, putting Greek goddesses into the different boxes and everything, it instantly made me think of the ancient Venus figurines because they don't have any distinct facial features, meaning even 30,000 years removed, we can still see ourselves in these ancient images, which that is just something that I absolutely love, that maybe these prehistoric goddess figurines weren't meant to have faces because the women in the communities, they each saw themselves in her. And I don't know, that's just my thoughts on it. And finally, we have the Venus of Laussel. And I know there's literally over 100 more Venus figurines, and we literally only covered like a blip of that. So that just means we're gonna have to talk about it more. We're gonna have to talk more about these beautiful ancient, perhaps ancient prehistoric goddess figures. So this Venus, also kind of different from the other ones. She is just carved out of limestone. But here's the catch. She's not freestanding. She's not a pendant. She's not a little figure. She's not a figurine. She's not a statuette. Nothing. She is not like the others. Because this Venus is carved into a limestone block. Well, it's now a limestone block. It was on the wall of a cave. But of course, she does share many similar characteristics that we saw with the other female goddess figurines. So the Venus of Laussel actually was discovered in a prehistoric Upper Paleolithic rock shelter in France back in 1911. And she is believed to be anywhere between 18 and 20,000 years old. And yes, as I said before, she's pretty rare because she is actually carved in bas relief. And she was once entirely covered in red ochre, which may suggest a connection to menstruation as well as, of course, fertility. All right, let me line my eyes. I'll be right back. So here, this Venus, she's actually depicted as being pregnant, at least according to scholars. And her left hand is on her stomach, and in her right hand, she's actually holding up a horn, which she actually turns and looks to. She has wide hips and large breasts, and of course, there is a pubic triangle depicted. And well, her left arm has some trauma. Yeah. Her left arm, the notches that you see are not from, thousands of years ago. It's actually from her excavation. It's from the early 20th century excavation techniques. So we actually see 2 strokes from a pickaxe that unfortunately did chisel a little away at her, but she's okay. She's doing good. And what's fascinating, her face, not only because of looking at the horn and we're actually seeing kind of like some interaction within the scene, but what's interesting to me at least, is that there were excavation notes that noted that her face is completely unworked. So what do I mean by unworked? So unworked is basically, that is how it always was. There was never a tool or stone that went to carve against it. It is basically just as it always was. Meaning her face was intentionally left blank without any artist wanting to put details in. And I have thoughts about this because it's a little bit similar to kind of what we saw with the Venus of Willendorf, but we'll come back to that at the end. And the horn that she holds in her right hand, well, the horn also has 13 notches in it, which is really, really interesting. I mean, it's all interesting. Alrighty, so from the color used, I can't talk and lie at the same time. So from the color used and the amount of notches, scholars actually have some thoughts on this. So this might actually represent the number of moons or the number of menstrual cycles in 1 year, or if not the number of moons or number of menstruation, it could actually represent the number of days between menstruation and ovulation. All of these have been proposed. It's also been proposed that the horn that she is holding in her right hand, that it may actually also not just be a horn, but it might be a representation of a cornucopia, which is also known as the Horn of Plenty. And going off of the previous anthropological study that I brought up earlier in the podcast, it would fit with the notion of these female figurines, statues, representing a well-nourished and reproductively successful community. So I could see how scholars would inherently not only see the horn, but you would also think of the Horn of Plenty, the cornucopia, and what that might mean to the entire community. And perhaps this pregnant female, perhaps she too was seen as a fertility goddess for her people. Perhaps she was seen as a goddess ready to bring new life. And perhaps she too played a role in prehistoric beliefs. But because I talked about, the unworked face of this woman, I love that because it's still very similar to, the Venus of Willendorf, as I said earlier. But to me, the fact that it was left intentionally unworked, there was a choice, an active choice from the artist, whoever they were thousands of years ago. They intentionally left her with no facial details, no characteristics that were individualized. They chose to leave her that way. And I love that. For the same reason of the Venus of Willendorf, of without having any distinctive facial features where somebody could be like, oh, well, it has, all of my facial features, so it's a portrait of me. No, because we don't have anything like that, because the face is literally just like a silhouette, basically. Any individual who goes up and views this piece today, views this limestone bas-relief in the museum in France, can almost put themselves in that position. I absolutely love this idea where the artists are intentionally hiding the face or leaving it unworked. Perhaps that allowed these ancient individuals, these prehistoric women, to put themselves in this goddess's shoes. Perhaps they saw themselves as part of this, perhaps even divine feminine aspect, which, I don't know, I just love this. And with all of the archetypes that we've done for, goddesses and women over on Sticks and Bones, it really just made me think of this because, women throughout history have been so powerful, and to have the oldest human figure represent a woman, incredible. It really just highlights, the power of these prehistoric goddesses, perhaps, and the power of women, and, what these communities and what these individuals were looking for, what they were holding above all others. So for final thoughts on these prehistoric Venus figurines, one, I absolutely see what the anthropological studies are proposing, that these female figures could be representations of early goddesses, early fertility goddesses. I absolutely love that. I love kind of seeing how all of these Venus figurines are depicted. I want to do so many more episodes on them, but from these prehistoric Paleolithic Venus figurines, I know it's a hop, skip, and a jump later chronologically from Paleolithic to Neolithic, but after looking at all of these, I was instantly reminded of the seated woman figure from Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey, and this figure has also been termed perhaps a fertility goddess, and we actually think that she is more on the goddess side because she's seated in a throne, and at the bottom of her throne are, I believe, two lionesses. And in mythology and in ancient religions, goddesses are usually paired with big cats. We see this a lot with Anatolian mythology, Hittite mythology, Mesopotamian mythology. We see a lot of, goddesses, powerful goddesses, being well associated with big cats. Ishtar, Inanna, Astarte, 3 to name a few. We see this happening. Also, Cybele. In fact, many scholars have commented on this might be a prehistoric version of what would later become the goddess Cybele. And I just think it's so fascinating to really trace the origins of these goddess figures and everything, and how women were being depicted for thousands of years. A reminder, these Venus figures are from about 38,000 BCE all the way to 14,000 BCE. That is a massive time period that we just covered in these 4 representations of Venuses. So from 38,000 BCE to 14,000 BCE, that's how much time these 4 Venus figures fell into. And they were all throughout that time period, with 14,000 BCE being the earliest one that we talked about, with the immodest Venus being the most recent in time Venus figure that we talked about. Everything else was over 20,000 years later. It's insane. It's crazy to me to think that in 2025, so many of us can find, parts of ourselves in these ancient prehistoric goddess figures. I absolutely love that. I love these Venus figures. There's something just breathtakingly beautiful about them, that for thousands of years, people were crafting the female form to look this way for a certain purpose. And I wish we knew. But the fact that these prehistoric artists and craftspeople were also intentionally doing things with these Venus statues. So covering the face for the Venus of Willendorf with, the braided motif, or leaving the face of the Venus of Laussel completely unworked, allowing all of us to almost be put in her shoes. I don't know. I absolutely love that. And then looking from Paleolithic all the way to Neolithic goddesses, and then from Neolithic goddesses all the way to Mesopotamian goddesses, to Hittite goddesses, to Canaanite goddesses, to Egyptian goddesses, to Greco-Roman goddesses. Like, it's so incredible, just looking at the aspect, or the archetype, I should say, of the goddess. What does the goddess mean throughout time, history, and all of that? And with that, if you're looking for more, archetypes, goddesses, all of that kind of stuff, you can check out Sticks and Bones podcast, Sticks and Bones Temple, for all goddess goodies and everything like that. Don't forget to check out Patreon for more archaeology, ancient history, mythology, and more over yonder with all of your tombmates. And if you want to travel to the past with me this September in China, we are doing it one bite at a time. Yes, because we are mixing food with history. So I am super excited about that. So you can check everything out about that in the show notes today. And who is your favorite Venus figure today? Mine, personally, I got to say the Venus of Willendorf. I absolutely adore her. And yeah, let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think that they should be called Venus figures? What are your thoughts, theories? Tell me all about them. As always, stay curious, keep your books open, and I will see you guys next time on the Dirt Diaries.